guys for watching our film. And yes, I became a producer on the film when my producing partner, Mimi Valdez, first had a meeting with Donna Gelati, who heard about the story and optioned the book when it was only 54 pages in, from Margot Lee Shetterly. And she knew instantly that I would be into this because it was three women, and not three women who were going away for the weekend or whatever. These were three African American women who, the protagonists who were scientists, they were engineers, they were mathematicians, and that was like super exciting that this was like these were the leads of the story. The idea that it involved space and NASA, two subjects that I've been obsessed with since I was a child, and also that this happened in the early 1960s in my hometown, Hampton Roads, Virginia. So we were like, man, we'll do whatever it takes to become a part of this film, not knowing that I would become a producer on the film. And once we were given that position, I instantly knew that I had to enroll my big bro, Hans.
Talk a little bit, if you would, about the project you were working on that ultimately led to the songs in this movie.
Well, at the end of 2014, I started writing these songs, and it kind of felt very 60s-ish. I even came out at the studio and played them to Hans because I knew I wanted his strings. I wanted his mind to be involved. He was involved in the Girl album too. And but I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And in fact, we put out a song called Freedom in 2015. But nothing necessarily felt right for me. It was like the 60s. I'm like, why am I doing this music? I don't know. And then all of a sudden this project pops up, and it was like, whoa, okay. So the universe was basically warming me up for this thing, and my mind was already tuned to the early 1960s-ish, if you will. And that's kind of like what led up to that part. But once we knew what the project was, then my mind was prepared to do more songs for it.
Did you, in specific, we were talking earlier about Runnin', which is a great song, and I See a Victory. Had you written those before you got Ben and Hans involved, or did all this happen while you were all partners?
Runnin' and I See a Victory were written after. I had the track for I See a Victory, but Runnin' and I See a Victory were inspired by the film and what was going on in it. Runnin' was essentially about, okay, so these women were living in the early 1960s. Being black in the early 1960s, just trying to make it and get by was a lot. It was a lot to deal with. They were, that was a very intense matrix to live in. But being female, and still to this day, it's super tough to be female too, but being female and being black during those times were just twice as hard. So being female in the 1960s, if you worked in NASA, you got the privileges of everyone else, but there were campus bikes, but because women, we take these things for granted. But women couldn't wear pants and women couldn't wear shorts, so there was no real bike rides, on the campus. They had to wear skirts and dresses. But being African American, you couldn't just walk to the end of the hall or the other side of your building. You had to take this 30 to 45 minute round trip to go to the bathroom on the other side of the campus. And so Running was about what her mind must have been thinking, living in the matrix where like gravity was twice as hard for females than it was for men. What must her mind, because the math that they did obviously superseded the time. The engineering and the science obviously superseded the time, right? We made it to space, we made it to the moon, so their math survived fine. So my thing was like, man, what must that mind be thinking? Like the mind that has the math that supersedes that matrix. And I See a Victory was essentially just, me trying to convey the message that no matter what you're going through, whether it was then or whether it's now, knowing that if you look at yourself from the moon's view, you could see where you are now, you could see how far you've come, and you can see how far you can go, and that adversity, that tribulation or that trial was literally just that moment, and therefore I see a victory in the future.
So, Hans and Ben.
Sorry, so very long.
No, we love it. So, Hans and Ben, talk a little bit about when Pharrell came to you, what kind of discussions you had about the sound of the score, what the score needed to do here.
Well, actually, Pharrell and I were talking about this earlier. We were really bad at dates, but Pharrell told me about the story. It feels like 2 or so, 3 years ago, something like that, I mean, I think the part of the way we work is we don't ever say, will you come and do this work? We just start talking and getting excited about ideas. And, Ben, Pharrell, and we had done other things together in the past. And the interest, so that's like the historical perspective that we've done things before. But really what made this, the thing that sort of made me think suddenly was, this music does not exist because the story has never been told. This is something, I mean, who of you guys knew about these women before this movie? Anybody? Oh, okay, there's a couple of really smart and super research people. But the majority of people don't know this story, and therefore the music didn't exist as well. We've seen so many movies about space, The Right Stuff, Apollo 13, and there is a genre of space music which is Americana, male, very white, and excuse me. For us, it was important not to actually take away the work that these men had done, but to add, to add into this, to add these missing voices, just like this story is adding a missing link to the history. And we started the way we always start. We start as a band in my room. We just get together and start flailing about with ideas and with instruments. And with Pharrell had a bunch of chords, and then there was a bass line that sort of made it over to the score, and then bits of score. So it's a truly collaborative process insofar that it was important to figure out how to create a whole sonic world. I mean, it's not that the songs are new, but they are steeped in history, and the music is new, but it's attached to the songs as well, because we try to go and figure out how to just add that extra bit in history, and that's why you have a very orchestral score which suddenly has a little jazz trumpet appearing, because that's sort of that's not quite what Aaron Copland would have done.
Right, yeah. Who's this?
Get your mic.
All right. This challenge of infusing the score with exactly what Hans was saying, it doesn't exist, but it does need to be heroic, uplifting, emotional, and there, we kept trying things, and there was just that moment of discovery. We got this incredible trumpet player, Johnny, in the room, and he just started improvising on top of these chords. And in turn, those chords were inspired by gospel music, and that was one of our very early conversations. It's like, for me personally, and Hans, it's just that sense of benevolence that you get from those warm harmonies, and it's like you're being hugged with the music. And that was just that starting point, like the simplest kind of almost chorale, just like the nobility that Katherine has, and then infusing that. I mean, something that Hans said also very early on was this idea that when we display mathematics and music, we don't want to just do that normal minimalist sort of motoric stuff. We want to sort of dance about the math, and it has a sort of swing and irreverence about it. And this is just a little sampling of the endless conversations and experiments the three of us had.
Let me say guilty pleasure. That's the one thing I really wanted I really wanted to do when you saw that first man up in space, that would be a woman's voice with it. Yeah, that was just
They're behind it.
yeah.
That's the reason they're there.
Also talk a little bit, would you, about what sounded to me like sort of analog synth noises, which it turns out aren't.
Well, there was this, one of the things was, what must it sound like? This unbelievable savant mathematics going on inside Catherine's head, and so we started off with this idea of interlocking synths, but then we were thinking this is the early 60s, this is kind of pre the explosion of all the Moog synths, and so we turned to electric guitars, and a good friend of mine is great at sort of creating sort of quasi-synth arpeggiated sounds, but entirely using live playing on using delay pedals and all that kind of stuff. So we recorded a ton of textures like that, and then put them through all kinds of tape emulators, like lots of hiss and lots of 15 IPS, all that stuff. And there was this great moment where we discovered when we reversed them and laid them on top of each other, slightly offset, and with a kind of a freedom about the approach, it just created these beautiful evolving textures. And in surround, we had one thing coming from the left back, and it was just this great moment of discovery, and that became a recurring motif. Whenever you see her at the blackboard, it's always preceded with that sort of shimmering electric guitar texture, which we made.
And one of the things, Ben, you alluded to a few minutes ago was the sound of the gospel choir as sort of inspirational to some of the material we'd be hearing. Talk a little bit about, there's a lot of vocal material, isn't there? Sometimes a single voice, sometimes a few voices, sometimes a full choir. Can you talk a little bit about how you accomplished that and how you made the decisions as to what would go where?
Well, we were just so honored to have this unbelievable vocal talent. We had Kirk Franklin in his choir in Texas, and he took on this role of, we gave him complete freedom. We would send him, demos with just the strings, with no choir parts written, and we just say, do your thing. And he would come back with this, complete stuff which we had no idea would come back. Both very straightforward choral chords, which we could layer in with strings, plus really interesting sort of comments. And then we had the great Kimberell just improvising over the top as the voice you're talking about on the guts. And that just was, as soon as we heard those recordings, it was just a whole other thing. and then one of the earlier experiments we did was another vocalist, Clydine Jackson, I believe. And she brought this sort of the soul. There was actually a real huge emotional moment, and the same with our trumpet player, Johnny. He was in tears when he was playing. When we were describing the scenes, we really felt like they were projecting their own perception of their history into that playing, and there was something very, very moving about that, and just, like I say, it was just such an honor. And also, this is not to do with choral music, but just about the future musicians. We were so lucky to have Herbie Hancock play all the piano solos. The mind boggles.
Actually, it wasn't that hard, because, well, it was hard, but we phoned Herbie, Herbie and I wanted to work together forever. Pharrell knows, and he's going, now you have to phone me. I'm right in the middle of all this stuff. I don't have time. Okay, I'll come in for like a second. And of course, as soon as he understood what this movie was about, he gave us all his artistry. The reason I paused is because there's one other really important element, which was Pharrell's suggestion, which was, why can't we have a more diverse string section? And Peter Rotter, our contractor, tried to get as many women and as many African American women into this section, and it was interesting because it was actually very hard, because there was less work here than there had been in the past. So many people had moved away, so we actually flew quite a few people in from New York and Chicago and other places. And then they started to play, and it sounded different than anything I'd ever heard before. It sounded more beautiful, and I know a lot of you guys are musicians, so you'll follow what I'm trying to say. So at one point I just stood back and I disassociated the pitches, the notes from the sound, and I was just listening to this amazing sound. And I realized what was happening was that for once, everybody knew what they were playing about, what every note meant, that the note was about them. And it was very personal to them that this score was happening, and that this rather large string section was assembled, and everybody knew what they were playing about, and it makes a huge difference, seriously.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of the director here?
Give him a microphone.
Yeah, Pharrell, I'm sure that you had some interaction with the director. It's not just you three guys operating solely. Talk a little bit about the director's input, what he wanted, and how you guys work together.
Ted is super talented, and we were very lucky to have him direct this film. He's the guy that directed and wrote St. Vincent. Yeah? Cool. Yeah. He's very talented, and his thing was, he was very collaborative. I mean, his thing was, he wanted to make sure, and I'm sure all directors feel this way, but they wanted to make sure that like it never went off the rails. Like it always would make, he always wanted to make sure it stuck to the intention of like what was written. But when things started to bleed beyond the lines, what I loved about him is that he trusted us, since, you know, we're musicians and our job is to sort of punch things emotionally on an auditory level to make people feel things on a kinesthetic level. He trusted that, because there were times where things definitely bled through and bled past what he thought threshold should be. He trusted. I felt like that's what made it fun, because what we were doing was so unorthodox, and the methods that we were using were so unorthodox. It was like you weren't guaranteed that you would get what it is that you were shooting for sometimes, and sometimes you would actually get even more, and sometimes it was too much, but other times it was like, wow, can we just please keep this? And he would say yes. So that was my experience with it.
We talked about two of the new songs that you wrote for the film. There are actually several songs in the movie, and I'm wondering what kind of discussions did you have, if any, about where to put songs and what they would say?
I was his worst nightmare. I was trying to shove them in. I mean, literally up until the last moment, I'm like, just because the story is just so inspiring, man, and it just lit us all up so many, you know, in so many ways. You know, I don't think anyone got rich off of this film. You know, in fact, I think we all
we all paid for it.
You know, essentially. But because the story was so beautiful in what it was, you would go to that set and the food tasted like it was a $300 million, you know, film production, because there was so much love put in the food. There was so much love in hair and makeup. There was so much love on the set. I mean, literally everybody that had something to do with this film. We were all on this high of, man, we have to elevate these women, you know, their incredible story. And so I felt like that's kind of like what made the thing a dream. It was like, it was just, we all were just, we felt so privileged to have anything to do with this film.
When you were on the set, is that when some of the ideas came to you for the songs, or did the songs more or less come later after you perhaps saw a cut?
For me, it was like the script. It was a script for sure. Running was definitely like, it was that moment where this woman is running in the rain, you know, 45-minute round trip, just because you're black and you're female. I'd like, just can't wrap my head around that alone. Let alone being a savant on top of that and having the math to survive. She's 98 years old and still living right now. Okay? To have the math, to have the brain that provided the math, that made sure that these astronauts made it in and out of orbit and eventually on the surface of the moon, and a probe that made it to Mars in 1976. I mean, just so many things are brilliant. I was like, what is that? So for me, it was just kind of like, how does that work? I mean, women still to this day, you guys, carry so many burdens that we as men will never understand, including the 9 months that you carried some of those chauvinistic men that we're fighting right now. It's unbelievable. So for me, I was just really trying to wrap my head around it. And I'm telling you right now, I had the hardest time. Imagine, men, not the women, we love the women, but men in this room, can you imagine having to go to the bathroom? It takes you 45 minutes.
In heels, yeah.
In high heels. Rain or shine. Guys, men, gentlemen, hello, hi, make some noise. Men. Could we imagine that? We can't. That's like tough. And it's like, you have a mother, you have a wife, you have a daughter, you have a niece, you have an aunt, you have a grandmother. Like, these are the things that they endure every day. So that was what that was like. I'm so sorry for that long tractor trailer ride. It's great.
John, can I be really horrible? Please. Pharrell, tell them that you met Katherine, John.
That was my next question.
Okay, good.
I did meet her, and I'm going to pass the mic back to Ben after this because I'm tired of hearing myself talk. But I did meet her, and I met her 6 years ago, way before I knew anything about this story or this opportunity. We have an organization and program for kids to help them in academics, after school and summer camps called From One Hand to Another. And most of our curriculum is based on STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And my mom likes to add an A because she feels that art is very important and should be in there. I agree. But yeah, Steve. So there was an African-American astronaut by the name of Leland Melvin who we asked to come because I wanted him to talk to the kids. I have this clothing line called Billionaire Boys Club that has an astronaut as the logo, and sometimes a helmet. And I'm like, listen, don't ask me about the clothes. This guy has been to space. Like, this guy is the real thing. So meet him. And so when he came, he also brought Katherine Johnson and her husband and a couple of their other colleagues, but I didn't know. And I think Leland may have told me about it, but I was just so like charged up that he had been to space several times and was going back. But I didn't know her story then. So when 6 years later, we get the gig, I call Hans to tell him about it because I want him to be involved. And I tell my mom, and she's like, what's the woman's name again? And I was like, Katherine Johnson. She was like, yeah, you met her. Yeah, like 6 years ago. She came to the event. I was like, what? So it seems serendipitous. In fact, I know it was.
All right, let's open it up for Q&A from the audience. Right here.
Hi, so has Katherine seen the film?
Yes, and loves it.
Next. Over here.
First of all, fantastic film and fantastic music. I wanted to know a little bit about the use of the voice and how it wove into the score as well. Were there any moments where the same voice was used in the songs in the score? And also, how do you see the voice in the score?
Well, yes, Kim Burrell. You hear her voice throughout the whole score. She's like the commentator almost, bouncing off the melodies, bouncing off the harmonies, and there was absolutely no rules. Not that there should be any rules anyway, but there were literally, she just sang. Most of what you hear is the first take of her singing. Improvisation, yeah. And she's featured in the final song. The other vocal elements you hear, there's Clydine Jackson, who's another incredible female vocalist. She has a slightly more sort of darker tone, so we used her for other kinds of cues. And then there are these two choirs, Kirk Franklin's choir in Texas, it was a similar brief. We asked him to, there was written music which choral stuff, chords and stuff, which we needed to have. But then it was also whatever you want, and we were literally working through the night doing improvise. I mean, there were these phone calls. I'm not exaggerating. 4 in the morning, Kirk on the phone. Okay, I've got my guys. What do you want to do? And the answer was always whatever feels right. And there was this sort of incredible instinct. And I think this is something I felt as part of this band. We all felt, all the filmmakers, we were led by these women and the story every step of the way. There was almost no doubt as to what, when there was a question, you just got to think back to, the good and bad, the adversity and the triumph, the sense of progress, and that led us. And we just described to Kirk what we were doing, and okay, now I get it, and this stuff came back. And also, Edie Lemon-Boddicker put together a fantastic choir of African-American gospel singers, which we recorded here in LA, just because we wanted, again, 2 contrasting vocal sounds, where we could, combine them, play off against each other. So that, it was starting from that philosophy of gospel, and like I said earlier, this idea of the benevolence of that.
Plus, if you want to keep your standards up, you get Edie into the room and make sure you keep,
Very true.
powerful woman.
Amazing.
All right.
Yeah.
Who's got another question? Here?
I'd like to hear more actually about how you decide, like when you choose to just improvise things, when you choose more to write out melodies, and actually use the score. How do you make the decision? Is it by feeling, or do you just sort of think, that part seems good? I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
Okay, well, what do you think?
I would say feeling is north for us. I think feeling should be north for anything that we do as creatives. As human beings, I think feeling should be north. I think this world, and especially this past week, would be a lot different. We just went off of feeling. But oftentimes we allow rules and science, not accurate science, as we saw with the polls. We allow some of those things to get in the way. But for me, north is always gut.
Yeah, but it was things like, hang on a second, there's a great bass line here, and the song of Pharrell's, let's go and migrate it over into this cue, or, the thing about us working together is, when we get into a room, it becomes a sort of whirlwind thing. I mean, we've done this before. I mean, this was on another movie. It's just, I loved the moment so much where it was Pharrell, myself, and this violinist friend of ours, Anne-Marie Simpson, and we were writing so fast that at one point Pharrell actually said, stop. I think my head's going to explode. I just have to walk around the block. And he walked around the block and he came back with 4 pages of lyrics. So I think part of what we thrive on is this sort of out-of-body experience where, we're just throwing stuff at each other and it's happening really fast. And then comes that moment. This is why the director is important. And we sort of invite the director in to be sort of part of the band in a way. But, when you play something to somebody, you listen to it through their ears, and the storytelling part comes in, and try to be very respectful. I mean, for me, what was really important, and we all knew this was a dialogue movie. This wasn't about our great, how many drums can I get into this? This was about supporting the dialogue, supporting the acting, supporting the story. But everything at first was written in, our usual mad scramble of feeling.
There was this incredible kind of jam session we did at the very beginning, where we didn't really know what was going to come out. But by the end of that day, there was just so much material, and all of which is in the score.
These guys have to run to another event, so we'll have to end it there. Please help me thank Pharrell Williams, Hans Zimmer, and